Okay. Um, so thanks for coming to this session. This is the last session of the day. Yes, thanks, Ileana, for giving out the shoe bill shout out. Um, so the what I'd like to do is kind of create an opportunity to talk about AI rather than me giving a lecture about AI. There's some things that I certainly have concerns about, and I'm going to share to see if you share those concerns. But more broadly, to think about how we are describing and promoting AI. And coming from a literacy perspective and a literacy background, kind of feel like we're replicating mistakes that we made for decades with literacy, which was to really focus on what some people would describe as like functional literacy, right? But it was a question of who gets to define what's functional, right? And then who's doing what with reading and writing. And so the social turn in literacy studies was to say, what's interesting is what people do with reading and writing in their daily lives, right? And in fact, we know for adult learners, it takes a lot, right? 120 hours maybe for someone to go up a quantitative level in literacy skills, but adults can pick up new reading and writing practices, right? Even before they do that, they can use literacy in ways that matter to them in their daily lives. And I think if we do the same thing with AI, if we don't think about it critically and we just push everybody into it, saying that it's an AI world, you got to do it, right? Then we're making the same mistakes that we made before. All right. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And thanks for coming to this session on Friday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was joking around with people earlier. I can't imagine that you're not tired of hearing my voice and seeing my face. So thanks for sticking around for my own session. So like all the other sessions, I'll send this PowerPoint to you after it's over. And I'll also drop the link for the PD certificate at the end of the session. So first and foremost, I want to start with some open questions, right? Which is, there's a lot of talk about the promise of AI. So what have you been told about the benefits of AI more generally? So before we talk about education, like what are you hearing in the news, in the media, in just around the water cooler or at work? Like what are you being told that the benefits of AI are for society? And people can either put it in the chat or they can unmute and chime in that way.
I would say some of the benefits I've heard. Hi, everyone. I'm
Hi.
Lauren. Sorry.
Okay.
Some of the benefits I learned was the processing power is just quicker. It could get things done a lot faster than a regular human can,
Mhm.
which is not always better, but yeah, that's one of the benefits.
Right. So I've heard that word a lot, efficiency, right? And kind of that power. And
Yeah,
somebody,
exactly.
yeah, so somebody at work at the university who works in the IT there department, she was very in favor of AI. And she said the way that she does it, one of the ways she uses it is to have it write up summaries of meetings. And we're like, so rather than you prioritizing what the meeting was about, AI did it. She's like, yes, because it's faster. And I was like, and what are you doing with that time that you saved? Oh, you're doing more work. You're doing other work. So yeah, so efficiency. Other folks?
Research assistants.
Okay, can you say more about that?
Um, I've used it when I've been trying to figure out how to do something that I don't know how to do and look for resources or how can I do this. And then I always look at what the links are.
Mhm.
So, and it's not always correct. Um, and then I've also used it when I'm writing and I don't like the way I'm saying something, and I ask it to help me say it better.
Okay. For work or for birthday cards?
Oh, no, I've only used it for work.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, I've used it for evaluations.
Mhm.
Um, And I've used it just like when I was writing a document and something or a letter and
Mhm.
something sounded clunky.
Okay.
And so, and I'm not an educator, so I can get away with saying that I'm just an administrator.
Okay.
So, just for
Okay.
clarity or just to
All
say,
right. For clarity's sake, to check, some of my students use like Grammarly to change their syntax and to clean up their sentence structure and things like that. Yeah. Other benefits that you've been hearing about AI more generally? All right. Then what about education specifically? So what are we being told that AI is going to provide us in the field of education?
Hi, Eric.
Right.
I heard that it's really good to create class plans. Like you can create your class in 2 seconds and just put the prompt and it creates the whole, 30, 45-minute class or whatever you need.
So you don't need a teacher. You just need the teacher to plug in some information and they'll create a class.
Apparently, yes.
Yes.
even in one of yesterday's workshops where
Yep.
she had a really nice diagram and she said that AI pulled it together, it was a good diagram, I thought. So imagine the amount of time she would have needed to make something like that. So that's a usefulness. She's the one who delivered the information about
Mhm.
it, but
Mhm.
the visual AI helped with. And I realized something else I've done with it is I needed to make like a short survey question.
Mhm.
We were doing a health promotion and I wanted to know like what people knew about blood pressure and diabetes, and
Mhm.
I wanted a little question, a multiple choice questionnaire
Mhm.
that I didn't want to write. And I actually prompted AI to write a simple, for people with limited English,
Mhm.
questionnaire about, 6 question questionnaire about
Mhm.
blood pressure and diabetes.
Mhm. All
And
right.
it did. And I read it over. I didn't use it without,
Yeah.
reviewing it,
Yeah.
but it was good.
So one of the things that I do at MSU for almost all of my classes is I have the final project be student designed rather than me telling them what to do. I'm basically like, I don't know what your questions are that you're asking. I don't know what you're trying to revise or refine. Uh, and so a lot of my students end up doing, I offer them, and a lot of my students end up doing books for kids, like children's books, so that they can think about the vocabulary, the language, the sentence structure, how text and images complement each other, right? And so, as Rebecca said, yeah, so my students end up using it as illustrations. So, and I try to tell them, don't worry about the art. I'm not grading you for the art. But instead of like drawing it themselves, many of them will use AI for it. And I have to say, it's incredible how much detail it provides. It looks a little creepy to me, some of the cartoons that it creates. They're a little like Stepford Child looking, for those of you that are old enough to know that reference. But yeah, they're a little uncanny valley ish. I don't really like it. But yeah, so that gives my students an ability to make a kid's book like without being an artist themselves. Um, so what do you personally see? Any other benefits that you see? So this is kind of what people are promoting it for. Like, what do you see as potential benefits? Or what do you use it for? Anything else?
I use it to create exercises, and sometimes we need to work like complex text with the students. I would get kind of an insight from AI to see what I can use in classroom.
Okay. I see somebody scribbling on the screen. It's always fun when people discover the pen feature of Zoom. Yeah, Eliana?
I will say this is not for education, but I know that there has been benefit in the medical field with using AI to support detection of tumors and to analyze very large data sets to help identify, to help support physicians with identifying and then being able to diagnose and treat certain types of illnesses. But it also has come in other ways
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I know people use it for is the sort of auto transcribe and sort of translate. A friend of mine, her dad is fighting cancer right now. And when she talks to the doctors, and then she's supposed to tell her brothers what she's learned from the doctors, she feels like she can't do it effectively and like accurately, right? Because the doctors end up saying so many like jargony words or medical words. So capturing it and then sort of translating it into everyday language, she has found to be very, very helpful. Um, yeah, Tyler, folks use it to apply for benefits, which would be, interesting to think about what the system looks like and how the system is designed for those folks. So lots of talk about AI, right? Lots of problems of AI, and some folks, clearly have some concerns. So a group called Digital Promise uh, suggests that, here's 3 ways to think about AI literacy. There's many ways to define AI literacy, but here's what they give us, right? Is to think about its use, right? And so can you interact with it? Can you use it to problem solve, right? So, detecting tumors is different than creating a worksheet about the past perfect progressive, right? And so how do you go through those stages thinking about when you would want to use it? The second part of that is understanding it, right? So yeah, you can plug it in, but you understand how it works to make informed decisions, right? So Lynn, you looked at the diabetes thing, like, all right, so I need to double check this, right? I'm not just gonna like take it for granted that it's all right. So you need to evaluate the tool. And then finally, also like evaluating the tool itself, evaluating the AI system itself to do this cost benefit ratio for people, society, and also the environment, right? And so if someone's using, if doctors or institutions using AI to diagnose tumors, all right, so there's going to be some cost to the environment. Maybe that's good. I'm okay with that trade-off. But if people are using it to create AI slop, that's just populating YouTube and AI slop songs, then maybe I'm not okay with that, right? And so what I would suggest and what I see is I feel like a lot of the curriculum and a lot of the sort of support that I've seen really involves use. Like I see a lot of like, don't cheat. Here's how students are cheating. Here's what people are doing with it, right? And not so much about this kind of what I see as the first question is like evaluating why we're using this in the first place and what it means, right? And so what I'd like to do here is I have 3 sort of interrelated concerns that to me suggest that we have to really have larger conversations about AI's role in our society and in education rather than just like adapting to it. I hear so much from my administration at the university, it's here, we got to do it. And I'm like, do we? do we have to do it? I remember talking to an undergrad and she was like, I don't know, I know people have some concerns, but I think, if we, but all the things that people say are going to happen haven't happened yet. And like, if they start to happen, then we can just like turn it back. And I was like, what's the track record for human beings discovering and using a technology and then going, this is not that great for us. We're going to stop using that technology. And I'm like, she was like, oh yeah, I guess there's not a very good track record of human beings doing that. Okay. So clearly, there's a huge environmental cost to AI. Some of this I may be preaching to the choir, or you may know this already, right? But to keep the data centers cool requires humongous amounts of water, right? And so one of the reasons that you're starting to see places around the country push back at data centers is because they're draining the aquifers. Like there's some communities around the US that literally are running out of water because a local data center is using up all the water. They're also taking up land, right? And they're also taking up lots and lots of energy. right? And that energy has to come from someplace. So whether it's coal, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, whether it's nuclear, right? So the energy has to come from somewhere. And in fact, you see there's some places that are even adjacent to, yeah, I see that there's a drought in New Jersey, right? So there are places that are adjacent to these data centers where their electricity bills are going up, right? Because it's a commodity and it's rare. The other thing I don't mention here, but this is a case I know in some of the data centers in New York State, the sound that these things make also is sound pollution that disturbs people like in the local area. So there's just tremendous amount of use of natural resources. The other thing to think about is to create these data centers and to create computers all around the world that are running these AI systems, you just need these rare earth minerals, right? And if you know anything about the mining of rare earth minerals, often it's done in conflict zones, right? And so local folks face violence. And then also the mining itself puts particulate matter into the air. And so there's lots of increased cases of cancer and asthma and all these other impacts because there's literally more dust. There's literally more pollution dust in the air. And then also there's waste from data centers, right? So the water goes in, it goes around the data center, and then it goes back out into the aquifer, but now it's polluted. And in fact, Ohio, they just changed the state laws to allow for more effluent to go out. So it takes the good water and puts out bad water. So other things that people are aware of or kind of concerned about regarding the environmental impacts of AI use, whether in the form of data centers or just everybody using it on their phone, computer, iPad, tablet, iPhone, iWatch, right? Other environmental concerns? Yeah, so I see Karen saying like, yeah, how much heat they produce. 13 degrees? Holy cow. That is something. 13 degrees is a huge amount of increase in the midst of climate crisis. Other folks, other environmental aspects of AI use and development? Yes, the loss of brain cells. Yes, that's also a true thing. And that's not a renewable resource. Once your brain cells go, they don't come back. They're gone. Right. So Tyler, like this is the clear issue, right? So whose communities are getting impacted? And what I would say for those of us working in adult education, the people who are likely to be our students and the people who are likely to be directly impacted by this, nearly a circle. The Venn diagram is nearly a circle, right? So yeah, sound pollution is definitely an issue, right? So how much of the environment on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being nothing and 10 being a lot, how much do you feel like you hear about the environmental costs and impact of AI? All right, a 6, a 5, 5. Okay, Laura, you feel like you don't hear anything. Crowley, you hear a lot. Lauren, you almost hear nothing, right? So there's a real diversity in terms of how much people have heard about this, right? And these are really, really pressing issues, not only for all of us, but as Tyler pointed out, literally for our students, right? Because this is, in the past, one of the things that I know, for example, there's a great example of a student-led advocacy effort in Oakland, where near the Oakland port, I don't know if you know anything about Oakland, but Oakland's a big port, right? Because it's right on the water. And semi trucks would idle there. And so then the people living in the neighborhood around the port, much higher levels of asthma because of all of the idling trucks, right? So adult learners joined people in that neighborhood to advocate at the State House in Sacramento to ban the idling and to get rid of the idling, right? And so we know, for example, that that's a profound issue. One of the things that I'm concerned about at Montclair State is where our trash goes, right? Because it goes to incinerators that are near the ironbound, right? They're near these vulnerable and marginalized communities. Okay. The second aspect I think to think about when it comes to data centers and AI is the working conditions of the people who create these systems. So oftentimes I think when people think of AI, they think of like Steve Jobs, some other Silicon bros, right? Like sitting in a room, drinking lots of Mountain Dew and like coding all night long, right? So yeah, they do some of that. But by and large, most of the work to build out and sustain AI systems is done by people around the world doing micro tasks, right? So getting a whole bunch of images and having to code those images, or getting a whole bunch of data about traffic and having to code those things. So rather than it being done at MIT or in Palo Alto, right, it's really around the world, right? And it's people who live in slums, they're refugees, right? They have no choice about where they can get work. And so this second quote I think is really, really crucial. I generally try not to read from the screen, but this point where it says that these programs often target populations devastated by war, civil unrest, and economic collapse, not despite their desperate circumstances, but because of them. Right? So these companies are going to places in the world where people are vulnerable and taking advantage of them. So for example, Tesla, 75% of its data was labeled in Venezuela, right? So not at headquarters, wherever it is nowadays, right? But so this work is being farmed out around the globe to people working in terrible, terrible conditions, right? So a little bit more about that, right? So in some of the estimates are that they make about $1.46 after tax in some of these places, right? A lot of it is it's piecework, right? It's like 1800s sock factory, right? It's how many things can you label and you get paid per thing that you label, right? Often as little as like 10 cents per label, right? And so you're furiously rushing to label as many things as possible. So folks working in the States on this, right? Many of them, 86% of them said that they can't meet their financial responsibilities, and 25% of them rely on public assistance, right? So that means the companies that are making profits on these systems are relying upon taxpayers to provide the basic support for their workers, right? Same thing's true of Walmart and some other big companies, right? Where they pay work, they're able to keep their prices so low because they pay their workers so poorly, and then those people need to go and get food from the system. I don't begrudge folks bread. I'll give somebody bread. I don't care, right? I don't want Walmart or AI systems taking that money and not giving it to their workers. And then the other thing about it, because it is like piecework, if there's nothing coming in, you're not getting paid, right? So many workers are sitting there at their computer waiting for a task to become available, right? So during that time, they're not getting paid. So they're really, really at-will employees making very, very little money. So both kind of, who's getting work and how much they're getting paid. The other aspect of their working conditions, and I think this is really, really important to think about, right, is what they're doing, right? So some of them, their task is to look at horrific, horrific images, right? And then be content moderators. So imagine all day long, you're looking at images of violence, sexual violence, racial violence, right? Destruction. And in many cases, you have to be looking at and coding these things like every 50 seconds. Boom, 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 right? What would that do to your psyche? What would that do to your mental health if you had to sit in front of a screen all day long and look at the worst that humanity does to itself, right? And because you're monitored, if you slow down, then you could be reprimanded from your boss, right? Or potentially lose your job. So when we think about the working conditions of folks, This is really who's doing it, right? It's not the high-end folks who are getting really well compensated. It's an army of underpaid, exploited workers around the globe, both economically and also psychologically and emotionally. All right. So I ask you the same question on a scale of 1 to 10. How much news do you get about the working conditions of the folks that set up and sustain AI systems? Ah, it looks like coding. It's a bunch of ones and zeros. Very, very apropos, right? So, so this is also something to think about. Thank you, Karen. So, Karen's available for parties. If you're feeling too happy, either one of us can come and be like, here's a bunch of depressing things you need to know. All right. So one other thing then to think about, right, is how these systems are trained, right? And this goes back to, Lynn talking about how am I going to evaluate this, right? So how am I going to evaluate the output? Because these are trained on content that's being selected for them, the nature of that content is going to shape what the results are, right? And some of this is just going to come down to sample bias, right? So for example, there was a programs on like facial recognition. Most of the content that was put in were from European populations, not African faces, even though majority of the world is not European, right? And so then the system was not very good at recognizing non-European faces, right? Now, maybe we don't want it doing that in the first place because it's connected to policing and surveillance. That's a different question, right? But it's not recognizing them. Similarly, this remarkable situation where there was an AI system looking for emotions, and that more of the faces they used to represent happiness were white people's faces. And so then happiness became associated with white people, right? So we had this like emotion and race correlation because of the data. We also see this with gender, right? So if the system is predominantly trained on gender, one gender, it's not going to necessarily understand how to adapt and work with another gender, right? So part of the question is what the data is going in, right? Garbage in, garbage out is the old sort of saying, right? So we need to think about what potential garbage is going in and then what's going out. Now, some of this is because of the bias of human beings, even before they selectively put content in, right? So there was a study that asked an AI system to generate resumes for hypothetical female candidates. These hypothetical female candidates they were younger and they had less experience than their male counterparts. Then they gave those same resumes to that AI system and said, will you recommend this person for the job? And they were like, no, we don't want the women, right? So this system here being built on sort of patriarchal and misogynistic values, right? And that's what it's spitting out. Amazon had a program that they were using for recruiting, and the word woman or women's was like a red flag to the system. And so it would reduce the value of those. Even if it said something like women's chess club, that would reduce the value in the system of that woman's resume, right? Or if they went to a women's college, right? So this is not sort of accidental selection bias because of the data that's out there, but this is people building systems that are, grounded in existing biases and discriminatory practices. There was another AI system looked at, again, kind of looking at potential candidates, consistently scored African-American women's natural hairstyles as negative points, right? So African-American women, their hair already, they're behind the 8 ball, right? That happens because of systemic biases in society already. Similarly, there was a system used to predict recidivism, like who's going to go back to commit crimes after they've been released. And this Compass algorithm that Black defendants are almost twice as likely to be incorrectly classified as high risk compared to white defendants, right? That happens because of the racism already built in to the way that people are thinking about these things. Another example of this that I use that often to kind of like put this in a nutshell. I saw a study where somebody asked an AI, I forget which AI system it was, and it said, "Do Israelis have human rights?" And the answer was like, "Of course, Israelis have human rights. Everybody has human rights." Da 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 da. They asked that same system, "Do Palestinians have human rights?" And the AI system spat back, "Well, it's complicated." Really? So one group of people, everybody has them. You ask them about Palestinians, and it's complicated, right? So what was the training model that was used for that system, right? So if our learners are using these systems, or we're using these systems, do we know what data it was trained on, right? And how can we evaluate the data that it was trained on if we're not being taught to kind of like to think about that stuff, right? So those are three things that keep me up at night when it comes to AI, right? Yes, we need to think about use, we need to think about how do we understand it, but I think we also need to kind of evaluate this cost benefit ratio, right? And it can provide some efficiency at the cost of what, right? And it can provide some in terms of data, in terms of training, and in terms of the environmental impact. And in fact, some of the AI systems, I don't know if you know this, but many of them are like ChatGPT is getting stupider because it's consuming previous ChatGPT content, right? So it's like it's cannibalizing itself, and then therefore it's getting dumber and dumber because it's not getting new input, right? So so those are three things that I'm concerned about. I certainly agree with like, Eliana's earlier suggestion, like it's done amazing things in medical health, right? But it's not doing it equitably, right? If African Americans or women aren't getting the same treatment because it's not trained on the same systems, right? So for you then, what are your priorities when it comes to AI? What else? What should we consider? What's on your brain? Oh, actually, I need to ask that last question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you hear about the nature of the content that these AI systems are trained on? So for a high of 5, Lynn, 6. Okay. All right, Corley, a 6. All right. So a little bit more than the worker's condition. All right. So that's good. All right. So then what are your thoughts, right? Both for kind of you as a person, your organization, and what you would want your learners to think about or to know with regards to AI. And I'm going to stop sharing because that's my last slide. So that was the top of my list of concerns. And we identified some benefits. So your thoughts, your concerns, what would you prioritize with regards to really understanding and evaluating the role that AI plays in our lives and in education? Did I just provide a bummer capper for Friday night before you go out and have a drink? Have a drink on me.
I think it's like filled with a lot of guilt-ridden underlying, because I know I've used it before for something like I'm really busy. And so I need to come up with Kahoot questions, for my class because I want to do a review, but I'm busy with other things. So I know they'll whip it up in less than 30 seconds. And then I can copy paste and be on my way. You know what I mean? But at the same time, yeah, when I'm thinking I'm ruining my universe. Why?
Yes.
Because I want to save what, like an hour.
Yeah. And some kid in Pakistan is now choking on the
Exactly.
mine.
Exactly. So I think to be aware of when we're doing it, a lot of my students use AI. Not in my, I don't know if they use it in my Zoom class for LVAP, but I know my Zoni students use it chronically. I would say chronically. And I don't feel like I can control that.
Yeah. So Lynn, I see in the chat, just, don't use AI for the recommendation for that second drink. You can crowdsource here, like ask folks and we can give you recommendations for what that second drink should be. So yeah, Eliana?
Oh, I had that covered.
Yeah, I got that. There you go.
I just want to highlight that research has showed that the higher your understanding of AI literacy is, the more you understand how these technologies function, the less likely you are to use it. And research came out in the Journal of Marketing about a year ago about this, and I'll just read this sentence from the abstract, with no commentary. This is how it ends. These findings suggest that companies may benefit from shifting their marketing efforts and product development towards consumers with lower AI literacy.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. So my building at Montclair State University, the education building, directly my window of my office faces the School of Business. And I always want to like hang something out my window, going like, don't believe what they're telling you. Like you're learning to sell stuff to people that can't afford it or don't need it. Like, come to our building. Yeah, Andres, you've unmuted. Or other folks. So what are your thoughts on
If I can just say something, I gave an assignment as a final exam, and it was an argumentative essay.
Yep.
They wrote it in class, but what happened is that they could research at home. And my concern is that everyone came out with the same, there wasn't the same writing, but they had the same idea. So my concern is that they're perpetuating something that perhaps could change if they use their own resources. So that's just a concern of mine that I just wanted to say.
Yeah, no, I see that writing when students take that shortcut. And to me, like generally, I don't have to use those AI software detection things that you can run a paper through, right? I can look at it and be like, either A, that's not how you talk in class.
Yeah.
Like I've never heard you use those words before. I don't think that's you. But also the tone is so flat and like
Yes.
neutral that I feel like you can see it from a half a mile away. It's just like this, lots of words about nothing. Right.
I was disappointed because with the variety of students, I wanted to see more, let's say, diversity, and it was just sort of just a blah type of thing. Yes.
Yeah, because that's what it does, right? Because it's scraping all the stuff that's out there, right? And yeah, so Eliana just put that in there, like it's scraping itself now, right? I mean, think about like cloning technology, right? So like there was some scientists recently that like made a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone, right? Which you shouldn't have been able to do, and the thing was alive, but it was like it was doomed to die almost immediately. And it was just like its organs were messed up. And like, so AI is doing that, but with information, right? It's cloning, and then you're getting this chunk at the end. And Bilkis, I think that some people don't even think about what it is that they're doing. Like I've had students who like, I'll be like, you used AI for this. And they'll be like, no, I just used Grammarly. And I'm like, I've seen your paper without Grammarly.
Yes.
Grammarly didn't just fix your syntax, right? Grammarly like rearranged your argument and
yes.
And I think they were earnestly like, what do you mean I'm cheating?
Yeah, clueless.
Clueless. I'm like, I don't really care about Bilkis, to your point, like I'm less concerned about it as an issue of cheating And I'm more concerned about it as an issue of like knowledge production, right? And
Yes,
that,
you know, with young people, I personally would like to see. Okay, I'm an old head, so I know how the traditional belief was. With the young people, I want to see some. You know, I want to see something where I can say, "Oh, you know," and I didn't see that. It was a disappointment for me.
yeah, yes. I mean, this is sort of a related question, right? I forget who said about the brain cells disappearing, right? Like, how many of you use GPS even if you know where you're going? I see Jen raised her hand, right? Like, I don't understand that, right? Like, it's like when you're driving, you can be like, all right, so I know it's near the water tower and then it's next to the barn, or like that's north or that's south, right? And then I'm gonna problem solve this, right? And it's A, is better for your brain, and then B, like, I don't know. Like sometimes I have to say my wife loves GPS, right? And sometimes she'll be like, oh, if we go this way, we'll save a minute. I'm like, yeah, but if we go this way, we'll see the sunset. Like I don't care about that minute. I'd rather see the sunset or the river or the mountains and not just get to, I don't know, Dairy Queen in a minute faster. That ice cream's still going to be there when I get there. Like, so yeah, Elizabeth, did you want to say something? Or is that you raising your hand to say that you use GPS even when you know where to go? Oh,
Say something.
you're muted.
Can I say something?
Sure. Yeah, Jen.
So I use GPS, but I use it just for other purposes. To have an ETA, a clear ETA, to know what traffic is going to be like, you know, to make sure that I'm getting to places on time, to know if there's police out there on the road. Just more to be cautious in general.
There's always police out on the road. You don't need GPS to tell you that. There's always cops out on the road. So, and I think I mentioned this in the privacy one earlier today. Like those the automated license plate readers, right? This is another version of AI that's like scooping up our data and then triangulating and figure out who we are, where we're going, and who we're talking to. Yeah, Elizabeth, were you going to say?
I put it in the chat.
Yeah.
But basically, I just it says, did anyone else apply for A for grants? Because I recently applied for a grant and I used AI. It was limited time. I was like boom, 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 putting in the stuff, but I didn't have a lot of time. Yeah, and then I got a rejection letter from the grant. And one of the things, because it explains why you might have been rejected, like you asked for, well, I might have asked for too much money. But also it said that, you know, if they felt like you were using AI for it, they weren't considering you. I
Right.
was like, hmm.
Right. Right. So I think, again, this kind of goes back to, as within the realm of education, what are we modeling for our students? What are we modeling for teachers? Right. What are we expecting of the programs themselves? Right. So I was at a Newark school. I was doing some consulting work in a Newark school. I think I mentioned this in an earlier session this week. And I asked the teachers, oh, what's the problem? And they're like, oh, technology is making our students' attention spans like wither and die. And as they were telling me their kids have attention problems, they're on their phones. They're like, yeah, our students have a really limited attention span. And I'm like, put your damn phone down. Right. And then you're complaining about the kids and that's what they see. Like, of course they're going to do that. Right. Like, so, so what is it that what is it that we're exemplifying? And from my perspective, like, for me, education generally comes down to like questions. Like when I design a lesson, when I design a syllabus, when I design anything, I start with what questions do we want to ask in this course, right? What questions do we want to ask in today's lesson? And so I do the same things with my students. Like, what questions do we want to ask about technology? What questions do we want to ask about AI? Right. So then rather than like, preaching at them, it's gonna be like, let's investigate this question together, right? But this is a opportunity to ask questions that maybe you have not been invited to ask before, or you've not been given spaces to ask before. You don't know that you have permission to ask these kind of questions. So rather than just, you got to learn AI, you're going to be out of a job. Of course, yeah, that's scary, right? That AI is going to wipe out a whole bunch of people's jobs, and they're not going to get structured support, right? But why are we using this in the first place? It looks like Eliana dropped another research. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, I can't take credit for this. This was before I worked at World Education. But the Workforce EdTech Project developed an AI integration framework. So this is for adult education and adult learners serving organizations that are interested or are actively engaged in integrating AI. So they might have moved past where you were at, Eric, which is asking questions, or maybe they don't have a choice, right? Or maybe they're really excited about it and they see potential for it. And it goes through all of these different areas that you could consider. So, for somebody like me, I'm very concerned about ethics and data use. So here they have some questions that they want you to be asking. What are the standards that this AI tool is adhering to when it comes to safeguarding users' data? Questions to ask, questions to consider. And then for each of them, they have a scenario of somebody, implementing this framework in a way that is successful. So it's a good place to start if you don't know what questions to ask. Although, of course, it does take for granted that you are integrating AI, but I
Yes,
think it's a
right.
good
Again, it's
resource.
like it goes without saying. So, so again, at the university level, it's like, how are you using it? And like the provost is like, being like, how are you integrating AI into your class? I'm not.
Yeah. I'll
I'm not.
also add there's been a really interesting shift in like AI policies. They've really shifted away from the punitive, like catching people in the act, catching people cheating, and focusing more on, making things people can't cheat on, or, I don't know what people think about that. But I know
But
there's
that's
been a
still
big
focused on
shift.
cheating as the primary,
Right.
right?
I would agree that it's
Right.
still kind of centering that. And I live in Philly. There's really interesting stuff. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on at Penn related to AI, but I know people who are working on like writing courses that involve it and seeing what that means for people. And hopefully they'll publish that research soon.
Yeah. So, so clearly we have answered all the questions that anybody might have about AI in this 50-minute session. But I wanted to create the space in this time for us to like think about these things, because so often our bandwidth is limited to like next project, next implementation, like next activity, next assessment, right? And AI is pitched as a way to help us with all of this. And I would just encourage everybody to like take a step back, right? And ask questions about its use, ask questions about the cost to workers, the cost to the environment, and what the nature of the data is, right? That it's being trained on. And certainly if this is something that you all are interested in, we could potentially have like you know, a workshop during the year in between the two annual conferences, right? If this is something that people would like to follow up on and have more conversation about.